I guess, unfortunately, public health has gotten worse, but otherwise, it's been pretty much like 5 Groundhog's Days in Connecticut, I think. It's a pleasure to welcome Matt McCooe. I don't have an official bio. I'll just hit a few highlights, which are quite high. But I think, and ones that are particularly relevant, and I'll ask Matt to fill in the blanks, because even though I know him pretty well, I actually don't know all the details of his career. But I think the 2 major things, presently, Matt actually runs, I don't know where it sits, but probably one of the largest state investment funds that directly invests in startup companies across healthcare, biotech, I mean, across a bunch of things, including fintech, but a lot of investment in technology spinning out from universities and innovations. Also particularly relevant to this audience, which is mostly made up of people bridging the gap from academia to the commercial marketplace. He actually basically, you ran one of the largest tech transfer offices in the country, right? So he has a lot of experience on both sides. And so I thought, this would be a really interesting conversation for you to hear about. But Matt, correct me if I said anything incorrect. If it's not terribly incorrect, just make it look like I was better prepared than I am. But
it was so close, Seth. We'll call it good. Close enough. And I did a startup out of Columbia with Glenn Hubbard and a few other people when I was in school. So I actually started a company when I was got my grad degree. And then I went back to Columbia and I worked with their faculty members, helping them spin out companies. And I ran a seed fund for Columbia University for 5 years.
If your company didn't sell for $1 billion, we don't discuss them in this. Like this.
It was low 9 figures. It was all right.
Okay. Yeah, I guess.
Not $1 billion.
So, let's start a little bit, Matt, with your transition from one side to the investing side. Are there any things that that stand out for you that were just fundamentally different that you didn't quite understand until you did run a seed fund at Columbia, but I think it was probably a little bit different than when you now do it, right, as an independent investor, essentially, in terms of the perspective you have when faculty members or others come to you for funding. Any obvious lessons that stand out for you?
Well, do you want me to just say a couple more words about Kinetic Innovations for those who don't know?
That's a good idea. Say more about that today. Yeah.
Yeah. So CI, we are the state's venture capital fund. We in biosciences particularly, which ranges from digital health to devices to diagnostics to therapeutics. We're investing $20-25 million a year. Seth's one of my investment committee members, so we prepare ideas. Not kowtowing to the audience, but the fact is, that having Yale here in Connecticut and having the corridor we do from Stanford to Branford and Guilford for tech companies and biotech companies in particular has been really great for us. And so we fund a ton of Yale spinouts. So we've got about 200 companies in our portfolio, and a half of those roughly are broadly speaking biosciences. Most are really, really early stage. So we will go in with, a member or a PhD grad or an undergrad even with a good idea and some friends and family money, and we'll put that round together. And we'll support the company all the way from ideation all the way through to IPO, acquisition, what have you. So that's what we're doing today. In terms of, is it kind of a lessons learned type question, Seth, and about
actually, before we get to the lessons learned, we can give a real example of one of my friends from residency who's CEO of Biohaven now. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because I think you invested with them at the very beginning, right?
Yeah, sure. So good example. So a unicorn in venture capital speak is a company that's worth over $1 billion, and they're called unicorns because they're so rare. They're so rarely seen, although it seems much more common today. And so Biohaven was a spin out from Yale. There was IP from Yale University, from the Office of Cooperative Research, and from Bristol Myers Squibb in Wallingford. So BMS was shutting down their operation, letting go of a lot of people. And so some of the really talented people from BMS got together, from talented people from Yale, put some IP together. The first product was a pain medication, a non-opiate pain medication, which actually was on the shelf at BMS. And that product actually went all the way through clinical trials and is now on the market. Just had their first quarter of sales. And it sold around $19-20 million worth of sales in the first quarter, which is pretty good. And CI was an initial investor in that round. I think there were probably $25-30 million that came in with us, which is a really, really big first round of investment capital. Most companies raise, the first round, you're talking about $250,000 to a couple $1 million. And the company's gone on to go public. Their value cap right now, the company's worth around $6 billion last I checked. It's trading around $100, give or take. And so it's been a great story for Connecticut, a great story for the, it's an intergenerational wealth maker for Vlad Kork, the CEO, and the entire senior executive team. They're all, they and their next sets of generations, are all set. Drugs are coming through.
Matt, they can turn on their heat whenever they want.
They can have the heat on whenever they want. Exactly right. Their grandkids can too. And interestingly, they invested in another company called Clio. They're going to invest in a third company, and so they're really a key member of the community. And so the way Silicon Valley came together is you had spin-offs from the original semiconductor companies, and they grew into Intel, and then Intel had 50 spin-offs. And so, getting this flywheel going in New Haven, or in the New Haven area, where we get one company, which was originally BMS, which became Biohaven, which is now Clio and Artisan, and that's sort of the what a healthy ecosystem needs, because in each case you're training more and more entrepreneurs, and you're getting more and more people who investors are going to have confidence in, will give money to go off and raise rounds for future companies.
So that's obviously an outlier. Almost no companies go on to become $6 billion in value. So yeah, getting back to this idea of what were some of the things that stand out as different from once you jump to the other side of the table as an investor, what do you see a lot of, and what do you wish they knew? Like, what's a couple of obvious pointers to you, not necessarily should be obvious to this audience, that come to mind, if any?
Yeah, so all this stuff, Seth, because you've done it so many. You've sort of run the wishbone offense a bunch of times, and I look at your companies and they all have these components. But first-time entrepreneurs typically they don't have the right team and the right partnerships around them, and I'll elaborate on that, because if you don't have a well-funded company, it's hard to get. You're not 15 people. And I do a lot of reviewing for National Science Foundations and others for these same things as reviewers for the SBIR grant applications. What's not that hard to get, it's not easy, but it's not hard to get, is to get advisory board members, some early people with relevant backgrounds that are willing to say, if you get this going, I would love to be part of your company as a consultant, and future down the road to be a full-time person, work with you and be your partner on it. Because what investors are looking for is signal. There's a lot of noise in the market. We'll see CI see 700 companies. The big venture firms are going to see 3,000, 4,000. They can't possibly go through the diligence on all of those. And so that's the noise. The noise is the 3,000 companies coming to them every year looking for funding, and they're going to fund 15 or 10 or 5. And so the kind of signal that you're looking for, that we're looking for, and that the National Science Foundation and others are looking for, is who are the people? What are the backgrounds? How relevant is it to the story that you're trying to tell about why you think you can make a product and have a big company around it? And that may be, if you're doing a a suicide prevention company that's coming up with a digital therapeutic for it, you want to have a bunch of people who are nationally known suicide prevention experts. That you want to have, if there are associations, you want to have them involved, and if there are tangentially involved, the people from the insurance industry, it could be hospitals that are relevant in the area. Looking for are people from those industries that you go to, you sell them on the idea, you get them excited enough that they want to put their name on it, maybe you give them some equity, and they become part of the story. So that when it comes to me as an investor, I don't necessarily know you or your idea, but I do know Yale. I do know Cigna or Aetna. Like there are things in that plan. You're getting letters of support and recognizable names that tell me that this idea is more real than the other 2,995 that I'm going to look at. So I think that's the first thing to think about is as you're putting your idea together. Far too many entrepreneurs, they either because they don't think they can get to these people, they don't have the relationships, the network, they don't make enough phone calls to go out and ask for the support. Too many people don't do that early spade work, which doesn't seem that important. It is really helpful for us as investors.
Yeah, the network, that's interesting. I'm taking notes for my end of day reflections right now, so hold on. So I didn't realize you were a reviewer for NSF. So what if anything is different between reviewing an SBIR and looking at an investment for the funds that the state oversees? Not that the state oversees. I know it's not technically the state overseeing, but the funds that you're charged with overseeing. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the reviewers. So when I sit in Washington or now on Zoom, my fellow reviewers are almost all academics. I say almost all, but they're all academics. I've been doing this for 15 years. They're always academics. And so again, it's a snobbish community, and they do some work on the science. If it's a medical devices company with MRI coils, you'll have some magnetic resonance experts who are doing some of the reviewing with me, but they're all academics, and so they're looking for the same thing. So they want, they care less about, does the person involved does come from Medtronic, because they may or may not know Covidien or Medtronic, but they certainly do know the other academic institutions, and they know the names. And again, the letters of support are super, and the partnerships are very important to them. But I would say the biggest thing is when you come to a venture firm, we're much more focused on the commercial side of it, the market, the product, the competitive landscape, the people's background, what they've done prior. Whereas the academic reviewers, which is all of the reviewers for the federal agencies, or almost all, they're really going to be looking more at the institutional support. So what university is behind it, what hospital is behind it, what kind of letter of support did you get from the local business people?
And do you think, I'm just trying to think of what's a fundamental difference. So a lot of the people in this group have written grants before. They're more familiar with that process, but when they pitch what would be a clear difference that would get you an SBIR, but might either work for or against you differently with investors and vice versa? Anything come to mind, or do you think it's pretty much the same?
No, it's really different. So the NSF reviewers, they don't really care about the business aspects of it. They do, but that's not their training. Like, they've been in academia for 30 years. Right, so they're not digging in on, they're not even looking at the competitive landscape sections. And so I would say and they're much more interested in the quality of the science and the IP and the product that's being made and is it one of a kind kind of product, and they're much more willing to work on frontiers of the frontier science side, whereas the investors, particularly today, like in the venture community, they want to see customers, they want to see revenues, they want to see big fat markets, they want to see a lot of white space, so there's not too much competition, but you're not doing something that you're not trying to create a new nuclear reactor, right? Like they don't want to do something that's 40 years away. Whereas NSF might say, a cool new small nuclear reactor that would change the energy paradigm would be fantastic. Let's do it. The investors wouldn't spend a second on it because the timelines are really different as well. So the investors will want to get their money out in 5 to 10 years, whereas the NSF is okay funding something that may not be a product for 15 years, and it may not be commercially viable in that time frame. So I think the timelines are quite different, and where they sort of what the laser focus is, product science IP for them, and for the venture community, it's team first, product, market, and competitive landscape.
One quick question, and then a slightly more abstract one after. So you mentioned the number of deals you'll see, and we all know, right? Lots of grants go in and don't get funded. I think this group's more familiar with the grant side. Not everyone, but most of them. How, if you were at Columbia or in your current position, what would you say is the number of investors you'd expect someone at an early stage is going to need to talk to before they get a yes on putting in seed money? What should they be prepared for?
Yeah. So let me first answer a question that you didn't ask, but I think it's relevant. So for the NSF I-Core program, which I don't know if you've talked about that program to these folks, but the NSF I-Core program,
not in depth.
It's got the lean startup concept. So they want the if it's my idea, they want me to talk to 100 customers / partners to get feedback on whatever my idea is. So they want you to talk to 100 KOLs. Sorry, I'm here.
Go ahead. Do you need to get something?
Yes. No. It's taken care of. There's one thing which is customer discovery piece, which is really important, and that is now part of the NSF training for their companies. And I think the number is similar for fundraising. I mean, I would expect that you're going to have to talk to, for every one person who says I'm even interested, you're going to get 25 people who aren't. To 3 or 4 investors, you probably need to talk to 100 people. And so each time you go into a meeting with somebody, your final question at the end needs to be, who are 2 or 3 people that might be interested in having a conversation with me? And that's the way you keep that going. You have to ask that question, and it's actually shocking to me how few entrepreneurs. In fact, I can't remember the last time somebody ended the meeting with who else do you think I ought to be talking to? But make that part of your litany of questions.
If anyone has any questions, start typing them in the chat. I'm going to ask Matt one more question, and then we'll see if others have questions. Is there one thing that comes to mind when you think about people at the earliest stage of spinning something out, which this group to a large extent is in that bucket? Is there one most common mistake that they make when they present to people like you?
Yeah, so I'll answer that 2 ways. One is, I'll start by telling a quick story. So John Doerr in Silicon Valley is considered sort of he's a top 5 global VC. He works for a firm called Kleiner Perkins, And Kleiner Perkins, this is like their ninth or 10th fund. And the fund that they were in, so that each time they do a fund, the VCs also are constantly fundraising. Every 2-3 years, they're going out to raise a new fund. And that particular fund, 8 or 9, was a dog. It was right around the dot-com collapse. And so all their companies were going belly up. All the companies that they funded in 1998, 1999, 2000 that they were hoping would go public for $1 gajillion were almost all out of business. And they had these 2 PhD dropouts from Stanford who were doing the 20th search algorithm on the market. So literally there were 19 companies, Dogpile and others. Seth, you probably remember these, all the
Oh yeah,
different search companies that were out there, right? Yahoo and everybody else. They were all the same. And these guys, they basically just said, you know what, we're going to do a page rank attribution analysis, and it's going to be a lot better. This is before they were doing AdWords and all that other stuff. But we think our algorithm is going to be significantly better. 19th company in the market, simple algorithm, change. Who knows if it's going to be better or not? They had 1 customer, I think. But what Sergey and Larry did and what they had was an incredible amount of passion and enthusiasm. So they really knew the search algorithms. They were incredibly dismissive of the others, but they had good reasons for why they thought the others were not as good. And John Doerr wrote the biggest check out of that fund to these two PhDs who were doing something that shouldn't have been funded, right? I mean, if they'd come to, I'll tell you right now, if they came to CI, there's no possible way we would even take it to Seth and our investment committee. But what they displayed in the meeting was an enormous amount of curiosity, great passion. They had incredible energy. And they had deep conviction that they were going to do something big. I mean, and when they said, what do you think this company's going to be worth? What do you think, this company's going to be worth someday? And they said, $1 billion. And they said, valuation. And they're like, no, we're going to be doing $1 billion in revenue in 5 years, which was asinine, right? It's sort of laugh out loud, doesn't happen. But for whatever reason, they were able to convince the VC that they had the goods to deliver on it. So I think that the reason I share that story is because it's really about you and how you convey your concept, and it's about your team, and it's about what you bring to that conversation that's different or unique. They're gonna get pitched by 25 people this week. They're going to hear a lot of different people telling them their stories. And again, they're trying to filter out the noise from the signal. And they're looking for a gut feeling. So I get a feeling when an entrepreneur, I almost know now, I get this sixth sense when an entrepreneur comes in that's going to be successful. And it's reasonably well trained. And I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I know it when it happens. And so I would practice that pitch and talk to people like Seth and me and work with us on your pitch, and we can probably help you get to the point where you have something and you have a way of delivering what you have in a way that's different and is going to help you stand out from the crowd.
So, you're an investor, but you work in a quasi way with and for the state, not really, but sort of. So does that change the flavor of what you might invest in? Like, are there things related to the state? This came in on the chat, this question. Are there other missions separate from the investment that you think about?
Yeah, so think of us like you would Google Ventures or GE Ventures or Medtronic Ventures. So we've got dual missions. We've got 2 purposes. When I look at every investment, it's not through a single lens of returns. It's through the lens of returns and economic development. So that can be jobs, that can be new buildings, it can be products and technologies that come through. But equally important for us, which is different from any other firm because it's unique to CI, it's, do I think that this company is going to have an impact on the state, and am I going to get returns? And then the second piece, the third piece, but the second priority is, can the company fundraise? Because as we look at our data, the companies in our portfolio that do really well are the ones that are able to raise a lot of money, or at least the money that they need. And so, those are the three things that we're focused. Development, jobs, and leverage are really important to us.
And lastly, self-funding, there's self-funding and there's sort of bootstrapping with some revenue as well. Pros and cons of self-funding versus going out to professional investors.
So again, give you two answers. One is, not everybody can afford, if you're a postdoc or PhD student, you don't have enough money to self-fund anything because you're not making enough money from your work. Certainly if you have a good paying job, that's a great thing to do, and move it as far along as you can. Jonathan Rothberg in Brantford, famously puts in $5-10 million of his own money before anybody else does, but he also has a massive yacht off the coast. And so for people like that, that's actually a place where CI will play. We'll work with first-time entrepreneurs. We'll work with immigrants whose English isn't great. We'll work with all kinds of different people, because we were trying to help people who don't have the same network and the advantages to get these companies started. So that's kind of a bread and butter thing for us. And so, if you can bootstrap it and pay for it yourself, fantastic. I think, most venture capital firms today, they want to see that. If you're going to raise money from the big name VCs, you need to have a product in the market, or you need to move things along. If it's maybe it's through funding if you're at Yale, and maybe it's just through making good progress towards the clinic. Maybe you get the Blavatnik Fund to pay for the animal model, or you get some work done with where Jenny used to work at the YCMD. You get some high throughput screening done. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can do at Yale you can't do anyplace else. And so I think to get the big VCs interested, you want to move that technology or that product as far along as you possibly can to get them interested. But for most people, that's not doable. And so you need to find friends and family and angels and people like us that are willing to help.
Yeah. We are out of time.
All right.
This was great, Matt. Thank you. Next time we'll make it 45 minutes so we can keep going.
Thank you.
And on a warmer day. Well, no, we want fire.
No, this is good. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Take care. We'll talk soon.
Great. Thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, follow up. I'll give you my email. It's Matt, matt.mccooe, MCCOOE @CT Innovations. Matt, and Seth obviously has it. No question isn't interesting. No question too big, too small. Fire away anytime. I'm always online, and would love to hear from all of you.
Hey, happy Thanksgiving. Thanks again. Thank
you very much. Thanks, thanks for everybody for being here. Appreciate it.
Excited to have her. She's been a member of our advisory boards from day one. She has prior experience with SBIR. She was executive director, I believe, of the SBIR program, and has